Earlier in the show, we heard from Deputy Defense Secretary Ash Carter on how the Pentagon is preparing itself for deep budget cuts if Congress fails to strike a deficit reduction deal and enact new spending measures. Many in Washington are optimistic that the worst can be averted after House Republicans agreed to suspend the debt ceiling if the Senate agrees to passing a binding budget, a measure that the Democratically controlled Senate has agreed to vote on. We went to Capitol Hill to meet with Representative Mac Thornberry of Texas, who's the number 2 Republican on the House Armed Services Committee. I asked him what he thought about the DOD guidance and whether it answered the questions that GOP members have been raising.
Not really. I think a lot of us wanted DOD to be serious about explaining the effects of sequestration before we ever got to this point. And that would have, in our judgment, helped motivate people to find another way, other spending cuts to take the place of the sequestration. And I still think there are a lot of questions as the services work through this, with some accounts exempt, some not. I think some are going to be hit pretty hard.
Do you think that they presented it, though, from an overall, from a good fashion, and at least trying to make clear that some of these are going to be very dramatic cuts, for example, reductions in civilian pay, as well as some of the furloughs and other things that they're going to be doing?
Well, it was a beginning, but I still think there are lots of details to be fleshed out that most people, and including most members of Congress, don't fully appreciate just how painful this is going to be.
You've been a bipartisan member up here, and you're now one of the GOP, part of the GOP leadership. What's it going to take to strike a deal that averts sequestration, extends the CR, avoids this train wreck in a way that can leave the House but also be passed in the Senate?
Well, I think everybody is grappling with that magic formula. The first thing you've got to have is a willingness to seek that compromise, if you will, where nobody gets everything they want, but everybody gets something that they think is important. And that willingness has got to come from the White House as well as the House and Senate. I think from a lot of us, as we look at this, there is no way to get a handle on our budget situation without dealing with entitlements. It's already 2/3 of the budget. It's the fastest growing part of the budget. That has to be a part of this mix.
Democratic leaders have told me throughout this whole process that entitlement reform is an absolute must. That at the end of the day, we have to do that. We just have to make sure that we get it right. Unlike a tax change, where you can modify it, folks are going to want to know what happens to their Social Security or to their Medicare. But there is also an acknowledgement that entitlements reform is not going to get you that $1.2 trillion, nor will it get you that $4 trillion, and that government spending cuts are going to be required, or tax increases. You voted for the tax measure that we just saw, in part because you thought it was better than the alternative, that it made permanent tax cuts that you wanted. What's the way to do this, and is defense still going to be something that's on the table for cuts if you're going to avoid further tax increases but still reduce government spending?
Well, I think defense is vulnerable. I would put it that way. Whether sequestration gets turned off with other substituted savings or whatever happens, we're going to see at best flat defense budgets, I think, as far as the eye can see. So that puts a burden on those of us in Congress, on those committees, as well as the Pentagon, to figure out how we get more out of the money we spend already on defense. I think that's the great challenge going ahead. It's defense reforms so that we get more out of what we spend.
The department has been trying to cut into defense reform. What are some of the other things that you'd like to see to get more for each dollar spent on defense?
Oh, I think we have to look at it across the board. We've had some sort of acquisition reform pass Congress, I think, roughly every other year since I've been here, and now most people acknowledge it's worse than it's ever been. So streamlining acquisition reform. There was one proposal, for example, that says get rid of all regulation in the Department of Defense, internal and external, unless there is a specific decision by the Secretary to put it back in. I mean, we're going to have to get more drastic than we've thought of before. Personnel reform has got to be part of it, but I think especially for the younger people coming into the service, an automatic 20-year retirement, health care, and so forth like we've had before may not be part of the package moving ahead, and it may be in their best interest to have some greater flexibility on those personnel reforms. Of course, we're waiting on the commission now that is going to make some specific.
But you think that there might be some traction on that?
Absolutely. I mean, you cannot look at the growing part of the personnel part of the budget and say, oh, we can't touch any of that. We cannot take that attitude.
Well, let's go to emerging threats where you're the chairman. What are some of the threats that you see emerging that we are not, or the administration and the government is not addressing at this point that you think should be addressed?
Well, I think there are some threats that are being addressed, but maybe not adequately addressed. Cyber is the big issue on our plate. Does government have the tools, including the legal authorities, as well as the organizational structure and the money, et cetera, to wage war in cyberspace? Terrorism is another one. We've just seen these events in Mali, Algeria, and so forth. It's not done. It's spreading in more places around the world. Again, do we have the legal authorities? Are we able to act swiftly enough? Do we have the military capability to go in and deal with a situation like the consulate in Benghazi or the gas plant in Algeria? I think those are some of the questions we'll be looking at in the months to come.
Do you think one of the things the President said in his inaugural address was the necessity for the United States to, whenever possible, to engage, to build alliances, and to have conflict as a last resort? Is he on the right track strategically, do you think, given our budgetary constraints right now?
I think more and more of what we must do is work by, with, and through others, kind of the traditional definition of what special forces do. On the other hand, there are reports that the French have asked for help with Mali, and we were reluctant to give that help.
And you think we should have been much more forthcoming, for example, if a request like that came in?
Absolutely. And again, as I understand it, what they asked for was some refueling help and maybe some intelligence support. That's the sort of thing we're going to have to give allies when they are willing to put their troops on the ground. And so, again, there's a number of questions. Do we have the legal authorities to get aid in to help military swiftly enough? Does it get all balled up in the bureaucratic nonsense? But we're going to have to do more of that.
Sir, thanks very much.
Sir.
Coming up,